You know that pigeon you see on the street? What if it wasn't just a bird? What if it was actually a sophisticated, remote controlled drone? It sounds like total sci fi, right? Well, a Russian company is claiming they've actually made it a reality. So let's get right into this because it's a pretty wild new frontier for tech. Yeah, that's a pretty chilling question, isn't it? And it comes from an executive at the very company that's doing this. It really hits the nail on the head, though. I mean, the whole idea is to use something so common, something we barely notice, as the perfect disguise for spying. It's a heck of a statement, and it really sets the stage for something that's, well, both revolutionary and, frankly, pretty terrifying. All right, so the company behind all this is called Nero. They're a Russian neurotech firm. And get this, their project, codenamed BGN-1, has this incredibly audacious goal. They want to turn regular old pigeons into a totally undetectable army of living drones. Yeah, you heard that right. They're basically saying, forget those loud, clunky mechanical drones you can spot a mile away. The future? It's biology. So you might be wondering, what is a biodrone exactly? Well, think of it as a mashup of biology and machine. You take a living creature, like a pigeon, and you surgically implant tech that lets a person control it remotely. It's not really just an animal anymore at that point. It becomes, well, a living, breathing piece of hardware. Okay, this whole thing sounds pretty unbelievable, I know. But how does it actually work? I mean, how in the world do you hijack a bird's brain and basically turn it into a remote-controlled vehicle? The tech is, well, it's as fascinating as it is invasive. Let's get into the nuts and bolts. It really boils down to three main steps. First, they have surgeons implant these tiny little electrodes right into the pigeon's brain. Then they fit the bird with a small, super lightweight backpack. And that's when the operators can start sending electronic commands to steer the bird, all in real time. And all these different parts have to work together perfectly. The electrodes, they're the ones sending little electrical pulses to specific spots in the brain, basically telling the pigeon, hey, turn left, or turn right, or time to land. The backpack is solar-powered, which is pretty clever. It means the system never runs out of juice. And then you've got a camera on its chest, streaming a live video feed, and the whole communications package is sending all that data right back to the operator.
And this is a really, really important point. This is not animal training. We're not talking about teaching a pigeon to do tricks for a treat. Nope. After the surgery, its natural instincts are just overridden. The bird is under direct, absolute electronic control. That makes it a totally reliable and programmable, well, asset.
So naturally, this leads to the big question. What is this technology actually for? The company, Nero, they swear up and down that it's all for peaceful stuff. But you can bet that military experts and journalists are looking at this and seeing something way more alarming. And this is where you really see that classic dual-use problem. On one hand, the official story from Nairo is that these pigeons are for, monitoring bridges and power lines, helping in search and rescue missions, or even checking on crops. But then you've got experts quoted in places like The Telegraph who are basically saying these things are tailor-made for covert surveillance. They're even talking about potential future roles on the battlefield. So you gotta ask, why a pigeon? Why not just use a state-of-the-art mechanical drone? Well, just look at the advantages. They're way, way cheaper. They're almost impossible to spot. I mean, who looks twice at a bird? They don't need any maintenance, no charging, and they can fly up to 500 kilometers in a single day. You can see why for a spy agency, that is a very tempting package. Okay, but a project this huge and this, well, ambitious, it doesn't just pop up out of thin air. And when you start to follow the money, follow the connections, a very clear picture starts to form. And spoiler alert, it leads straight to the top. So the first big connection is this. Nero is getting support from the Artificial Intelligence Research Institute at Moscow University. And this isn't just some random college department. This institute is known for developing these dual-use technologies, things that can be used for both civilian and military purposes. And who's running that institute? Well, according to the Times of London, the director is none other than Katerina Tikhanova, who just so happens to be President Vladimir Putin's daughter. So all of a sudden, this little tech project is directly linked to the president's own inner circle. Wow. And yeah, this is definitely not some experiment being run out of a garage. We're talking about serious money here. A reported $13 million. That tells you this is a really well-funded venture with some very powerful people behind it.
And here's the final piece of the puzzle. A big chunk of that money, it came from Russia's National Technology Initiative Fund. And guess what? That's a state fund that was set up by a direct order from President Putin himself. At this point, the connections are, well, they're pretty undeniable.
As you can probably guess, when news of this project broke, the reactions were all over the map. I mean, you had everything from people just not believing it and making fun of it, to some very serious analysis and a good deal of fear.
A lot of people are just plain skeptical, like this one commenter who points out something we've heard before, that Russia has a habit of announcing these futuristic superweapons or crazy new technologies just for the media hype, but then they never actually show up in the real world. Then, of course, you've got the jokesters. People are reacting with a lot of humor, and you can't blame them. The whole story is kind of absurd, right? The idea of starting a pigeon for hire business in the age of cyber warfare? Yeah, it's pretty funny. And then there's the propaganda theory, which is, a fair question. Why on earth would you announce a top-secret espionage tool to the whole world? This theory suggests that the whole announcement is actually a big act of disinformation, just a clever move to distract and confuse Russia's enemies. But okay, let's put aside the jokes and the propaganda theories for a minute. There's a really serious question here. If this tech is real, and if it is meant for military use, what's the worst-case scenario? What's its most dangerous potential?
And this is probably the most chilling possibility of all, and it was brought up by a U.S. advisor. Forget just spying. These biodrones could, in theory, be used to carry and deliver biological weapons. We're talking pathogens, silently and completely undetectably, right into enemy territory. Now, for what it's worth, Nero has put out a statement flatly denying any military purpose. They're insisting that all their work is purely civilian and that they don't have close ties with the Russian government. Despite all that evidence we just saw about the funding and who's in charge. We're used to seeing machines turn into weapons, but this feels different. We're stepping into a whole new era where living things themselves can be weaponized in a completely new way. When you can literally hack and control nature's own creations, it really makes you stop and ask, what does the future of conflict, what does the future of espionage even look like from here?